Welcome into the Why You're Wrong Fantasy Football Podcast. We are on episode 22. We are breaking down each division, starting with the AFC East. How you been doing, Brian?
I'm doing good. 22 episodes in, and how many weeks we got left till football?
I think we have between 8 to 7 weeks until technical kickoff starts.
We're getting there. It's coming soon, that's for sure.
So I'm your monotone master. Brian is our fantasy foreseer. You can find us on social media. TikTok and Instagram as Why You're Wrong FFB, and on Twitter as You're Wrong FFB. And let's just start off with some impactful news, Brian. So the Aaron Rodgers update was he just won a championship versus Tom Brady, right?
And we just watched it. It was on live television. It was Phil Mickelson and Tom Brady versus Bryson DeChambeau and Aaron Rodgers. And honestly, from a golf perspective, I know you're not a golfer, but Aaron Rodgers played very, very good golf, and I was surprised to see it. So I don't know how those teams actually panned out, but yeah, Aaron Rodgers came home with a victory, and Tom Brady was a little salty about it.
I think my favorite part was all the stuff, all the hard time they were giving Aaron Rodgers. Like, everyone was like, Aaron, so you gonna be back week one? He's like, we'll see, like, maybe.
Yeah, I think Brady made a comment. He's like, yeah, I think I'm playing against the guy who's going to be the quarterback for the Packers. And just subtle chirps to Aaron Rodgers, which is funny. And it seems like he wasn't too happy about it, but, you know, that's just that's Tampa Brady right there. That's what everyone's saying.
I think my favorite thing I saw between their chirps back and forth up into the match was when you're in, like, a Jeopardy kind of game, they're like, which one of us, like, can play the guitar, owns an NBA franchise, and some other stuff. And Tom Brady goes, who is upset with their boss and doesn't want to play for Packers?
That's funny. That's funny.
And Aaron was like, I never said I was upset, but he's not happy.
I mean, Aaron Rodgers is definitely a little upset with them. I don't know where he's going to end up. It's still, I mean, we got a few weeks left till it happens, but my guess is that, well, actually, there's another thing too. I think during the golf round, he told Charles Barkley that he was going to tell Charles next week what team he was going to end up playing for, or he's going to break the news to him. So I expect that we're probably going to hear some type of news about him, and maybe next week or the week after that. But it's got to say something soon because he hasn't opted out, which is kind of concerning in a way. Yeah. But I don't know what team he's going to end up playing for.
Another guy who wants to be traded, N'Keal Harry, Brian. We haven't discussed this, but your number one receiver for the New England Patriots wants to be traded. What's going on?
I've been saying that they should call up the Seahawks. They should say, hey, we messed up in the draft. Give us DK Metcalf. We'll give you guys N'Keal Harry. Even trade. We messed up. I think that's just how it should be. I mean, N'Keal Harry is just not a good football player. Let's just be honest. Like, I don't know if it's a quarterback room that's making him bad, but I think he's okay. It's just like, get him out of here. He doesn't work in our system at all.
2 years, 80 receptions, not a good look for a first-round pick. I just wonder, what about the butterfly effect? If he scores that touchdown versus the Chiefs, which he did score, but they ruled him down or was incomplete, is he still in the team? Does the Patriots season change? Like, does that one play have any effect down the line?
No, because, I mean, it's his decision that he's the one that's requesting the trade. So it's not like we're just, like, trying to ship him out. It's more like he doesn't feel like he's being used to his full potential in our offense, which it makes sense because Cam Newton can't hit a receiver downfield more than 20 yards, which is kind of a problem for N'Keal Harry because all he is a red zone threat that just goes deep. But I think that some team will probably end up trying to trade for him. I don't think they're going to get a lot for him, maybe like a 5th round, 6th round pick at best.
Yeah.
Like, that's pushing it too.
I think it's also hard to find a team that actually wants him.
Because he hasn't shown any credibility here. But I mean, he was a top draft pick. He was good in college, so I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if some team tried to trade for him just for a low price.
Do you think we could get a documentary called the N'Keal Harry 4 where we talk about the 4 receivers that went after him in the draft?
Yeah, no, we're not going to talk about that. I don't think we're going to talk about that. It's pretty bad. Yeah. Let's just say that. Yeah.
So I also did see that when Saquon Barkley was asked when he's going to be ready to see the field, he basically dodged the question and did not answer when he's actually going to return to the practice field.
I actually didn't see that. I honestly saw a news article about it, but I honestly didn't see what he actually said.
For me, that's like a kind of a red flag off the bat because he just had such a major injury to his leg that if the reports are saying like, yeah, he's going to be ready week 1, he's at training camp, he's moving, but he's not like in pads yet, or he's just going through the motions, I'd be okay with that. But the fact that like he's not really practicing yet, that's concerning for me, basically because he's a first round pick. Are you going to invest in a guy that could possibly not be at full 100% week one.
I feel like he probably will be okay. He might just be dodging the news because he's not sure about what the Giants think of his injury. But if they told him, they're like, hey, Swan, do you want to play? I'm sure he'd say yes. I think it's more up to the Giants are babying him into the steps of like getting ready to work his way up to week one. But if you were to ask him personally, like, do you want to play? I'm sure he'd say yes.
And then recently, the Cowboys were selected for HBO's series Hard Knocks. It's been several times they've been on this. For me, this just means you're going to get to see up close into the dysfunction of the Cowboys locker room. And really, it's just, let's put the camera on Jerry Jones and see what he says.
I'm happy to see it. I thought the last few Hard Knocks were not good at all, and I love the Hard Knocks series. Like, last year was not great. I mean, because of COVID, it was kind of just like all over Zoom. There wasn't a lot of football action going on. A lot of people couldn't like stay in close contact. So it's like there wasn't that like back and forth banter on the field. But with the Cowboys now doing it, I think that with that offense and how high powered and how many good players there actually are on that team from a fantasy perspective, I think it's going to be super interesting to see like how Zeke and Dak's comeback's going to be, CeeDee Lamb's breakout year this year. So it's going to be cool.
Well, it's basically going to bump up Dak Prescott and the Cowboys wide receivers in the ADP because everyone's going to be seeing them on the screen right before drafts.
That's a good point. I mean, CeeDee Lamb's already like the 13th ranked receiver, which is great. I still can't wrap my head around that, but like if I have CeeDee Lamb as like a number 1, number 2 receiver, I don't know how confident I feel about that yet.
I think if I'm drafting CeeDee Lamb, I'm pairing him with a receiver I took in round 3. So that way I feel a little bit better if he doesn't do what we want him to, because if you think him as your wide receiver 1 and he doesn't if he basically doesn't live up to the hype, you're going to be really disappointed. But if he's your wide receiver 2, you can feel more comfortable moving on to a different option.
I mean, he still did good with Andy Dalton. So with Dak Prescott breaking passing yard records, actually, I think he has the most passing yards out of any quarterback in like the last 4 seasons for a quarterback. And he was hurt too, which is insane. So his comeback should be huge. Zeke should be better this year. Amari Cooper should be better this year. CeeDee Lamb should be better this year. The whole offense could be great.
Exactly. So, but now it's time for our deep dive into the division. So looking at each position on each team in depth, we're not just like glancing over the team as a whole. We're looking at each fantasy piece of their team. We're trying to look at trends and tendencies of each position. Going to be a longer episode. It's going to be loaded with information. And we're going to try to give a verdict on if you should want this player on your team or not after discussing them. So we're going to start with the AFC East because we're very familiar with those teams.
Of course.
We're going to start at the top. The number 1 team, the AFC East last year, the Buffalo Bills, finished 13-3, lost the conference championship to the Chiefs. So right now they're rocking quarterback with Josh Allen, running backs Zach Moss and Devin Singletary. Wide receiver room looks like Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley, and Emmanuel Sanders. Their tight end is Dawson Knox. Last year, they ranked 2nd in offense, 8th in defense, had a 60-40 pass run play selection split, and they actually have the 10th easiest schedule for 2021.
That is interesting to see. I think the Buffalo Bills, honestly, are a Super Bowl contending team. Every time I bring it up to someone, they're always like, got to get past the Chiefs. You got to get past the Chiefs, got to get past the Ravens too. Like, I think the Bills have the pieces to do it. If they just had a little bit better of a running back to be able to have that run-pass combo, because people are going to just defend the pass all year. They don't really have any run game whatsoever other than Josh Allen. I think that they could probably win a Super Bowl, but then again, it's the Bills. They don't win. They don't win a lot.
They have the tragic story of always losing big.
Yeah, almost. What if we won the Super Bowl?
Yeah. So we're really going to start off. We're going to dive into Josh Allen. So last year, he's the fantasy MPV, quarterback 1, 107 QBR, threw for over 4,500 yards with 37 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, adding on 420 rushing yards and 8 touchdowns. I'll let you take the reins from here, Brian, because Josh Allen was your fantasy guy. I want you to really talk to me about Josh Allen.
I drafted Josh Allen in 3 of my fantasy leagues, every single one of my fantasy leagues, and I got hate from every single league I took Josh Allen in. They all gave me hate for it, and I didn't understand why. The season before that, he was putting up 30-point games, 30-plus point games every single week. And they were on a losing football team. They were the game script Buffalo Bills. They were down. They would score a ton of points in the fourth quarter. Josh Allen was great. Has tall dude. He's can run the ball. He can throw the ball 70 yards downfield. There's nothing not to like about Josh Allen. And then when he started playing, we had Stephon Diggs come in the role. People were like, oh, is Stephon Diggs going to be a true wide receiver one? He was always behind Adam Thielen on the Vikings. Like, I knew Stephon Diggs was going to be a beast. I knew Josh Allen was going to be a beast. And they had the pieces around it to be able to be, a top 3 fantasy quarterback. On the flip side, how good Josh Allen actually is, he is not only a great passer, but he's a great runner, and he vultures every single rushing touchdown within 5 yards. He will get you 380 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, and maybe 2 rushing touchdowns. And you could probably bank on that most week, which is just absolutely nuts. So every single score you see from the Buffalo Bills, it's probably going to be some type of Josh Allen, which is the great part about it. And it only helps that Stephon Diggs is great. Cole Beasley, one of the most underrated receivers in the entire league. I had him in fantasy last year too. Target machine, great in the slot. Maybe if they got a little bit of a better tight end, I'd feel a little bit more comfortable about drafting him again this year. But Dawson Knox still gets it done. So I'm all on Josh Allen. If I could draft him again this year, I'll do it. I think he can win the MVP, and he is that good.
So building on what you said, he progressively has improved as a quarterback every single year. His rookie season, his QBR was 68. Sophomore season, 85. This past season, 107. But his rushing totals have actually declined each year by 100 yards. So his first year, he ran for about 600 yards. Last year was 500. He's now at 400. It's almost, he's rushing less as he gets better as a passer, which makes sense. But his 8 rushing touchdowns are basically a sign that he will still vulture the touchdown from the running back at the goal line.
Yeah, I think the thing, too, is that they want to probably keep their star quarterback safe and healthy. And if you run him, for 600 yards, and you want him to get to 600 rushing yards, you want him to get to 700 rushing yards, like, he's going to end up getting hurt at some point. I mean, he got banged up pretty bad on some games last year, and he powered through it. And, I don't know how he didn't get injured, but, he got cracked at the goal line a couple times. And it just takes one to be able to, end his season, which is kind of scary. So they're trying to shift him to more a passer, to be, more of a passing quarterback. But at the same time, he will get those, read option rushing touchdowns in the end zone. And that just kind of makes him, a top fantasy QB to draft.
So is this his ceiling, Brian? Can he get better, or is this it for Josh Allen? 4,500 yards, 35 to 40 touchdowns.
See, I don't think he's going to put up the same numbers as he did last year. I don't know why. I feel like every time you see someone do very well, it's very hard to beat what they did the season prior. But I think that he can put up similar numbers. It really depends on, will he stay healthy? Will he run the ball as much this season? Now they're trying to keep him a little bit healthier. Maybe they use Zach Moss a little bit more in the red zone. But it really depends on, will they let him run the ball in the red zone, or are they going to try to save him and do a little bit more trick plays and use Zach Moss, use Devin Singletary, and use the fullback who's over there?
Right.
So it really depends on, will he get those goal line carries? Because if he doesn't, then he's going to be more like the 4-3 quarterback at that point.
If you look at his running stats, because that's kind of the unpredictable part, especially rushing touchdowns. If you cut his running stats in half, he sort of ended up as the quarterback 6, which we would have been very happy with on the season anyway. So I think the final verdict is you draft Josh Allen if you can.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And I think he had some type of stat, too, that, he didn't throw an interception in the red zone for, the longest time. I think he broke that streak last year, but he had, a massive streak where he didn't throw an interception in the red zone. So that's another thing, too. If he's getting in the red zone, he's probably not turning the ball over. Another key thing to look for when drafting a fantasy quarterback.
Now to dive into the running backs, Brian. So we have Zach Moss and Devin Singletary. Let me ask you, this is a fun question. Who had more rushing yards in 2020, Josh Allen or Zach Moss?
Probably. I feel like it's Zach Moss.
It's Zach Moss by 60 yards.
See, that's just sad. That's just sad.
So Devin Singletary finished as the running back 37. Zach Moss finished as the running back 43. That's not great.
It's not great.
So Singletary, 687 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, added 38 receptions for 270 yards. Zach Moss, 481 rushing yards, 4 touchdowns, 14 receptions for 95 and 1 touchdown. So Zach Moss has quote-unquote been named the starter in the Buffalo committee approach. he may actually start to see the field more because he does have the ability to pass block, which makes him super vital in the red zone. And he's 100% more favored at the goal line than Devin Singletary. For me, it's just, I don't want either on my team. Like, my verdict for both of these running backs is don't draft either.
Yeah, I mean, they're a pass heavy offense. Like, they will literally be up. They're like, the Bills are just such, like, they're just so mean. They literally will be up 35 points in the fourth quarter, and they will go from the shotgun, empty spread, no running back, and they will sling the ball down. Like, they'll just sling the ball.
The Bills are playing Madden.
They literally are playing Madden. They try to score as many points as possible. I mean, I own Josh Allen. I've watched probably every single Buffalo Bills game, and they do not care about their running backs whatsoever. All they care about is padding stats and scoring as many touchdowns with Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, and that wide receiver core that they have.
So now let's just talk about the wide receiver core. We have Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley, Emmanuel Sanders. So Stephon Diggs last year finished as the wide receiver 3, 127 on receptions for 166 targets. That led to 1,500 yards and 8 touchdowns. Career season, reception monster. Do you think this is his ceiling? He had 7 games over 100 yards. 4 of those were over 130 yards. He gets about 27% of Josh Allen's targets.
I think Stephon Diggs is the best route runner in the game behind Devontae Adams. And I said this before. Everyone hated for me for saying it. He came over the Bills. Everyone was like, can Stephon Diggs be a true wide receiver 1? I think Stephon Diggs is so good at man coverage and one-on-one coverage that this is not his ceiling. I think he could probably go further than that. And I think he's going to continue to do that as long as Josh Allen is healthy. The Bills are good. And I think that if you draft Stephon Diggs as like a top 5 wide receiver, you're not going to be disappointed. He's going to get you over 14 points every single week, and you're going to get those 30-point weeks from him too. So I'd expect his touchdowns to go up. I just don't know if the yards are going to be there because Cole Beasley's kind of shifting his way into being a little bit more of a slot guy. His numbers might increase a little bit too, but I don't think you can go wrong with Stephon Diggs whatsoever.
So speaking of Cole Beasley, wide receiver 31, 82 receptions on 107 targets. 107 targets as the wide receiver 2 is really good for a team like this. Almost broke 1,000 yards, 4 touchdowns on the year, 5 games over 100 yards, and had an 18% target share, which is honestly super valuable if you're the slot receiver on a team like this.
Yeah, Cole Beasley didn't really emerge to like the end of the season. I think I picked him up like towards playoffs, and I was starting him in most playoff games, and I think he had like a 30-point game against the Cardinals. Then he had like a 14-point game against some team that I can't remember. Then he played the Cardinals again, and he dropped like 25 points. So like I started him for all 3 of those weeks. I couldn't tell you why, but it was more so that their defense just was not good against slot receivers, and that's why I made that decision. But I think that, you know, with the schedule that they have coming up, I think that you probably will see Cole Beasley increase target share a little bit more this year. I'm not saying it's going to take away from Stephon Diggs whatsoever, but drafting Cole Beasley as kind of that sleeper guy towards like the end of your draft, he's like a huge, sleeper to have on your bench or even have as like your wide receiver 3 that you just didn't end up drafting.
Yeah, Cole Beasley for me is a guy I'm drafting at the end of 12-team leagues, like knowing that he's not going to be a wide receiver 1, but for that week I need him. He could give me wide receiver 2 or high-end wide receiver 3 numbers.
You should feel good about putting Cole Beasley into your lineup. It's like there's nothing wrong. Like he could go off for 30 or he could go off for like 8, but like the fact that there's such a high-powered offense, like Cole Beasley can be trusted in weeks that you do need him. I wouldn't say he's a starter every week because he does put up duds like 4 or 5 points, but he does have those 30-point weeks just because of how good Josh Allen is.
So the third guy we got to talk about, just because he's new in town, Emmanuel Sanders finished last year as the wide receiver 45, 61 for 82, racking up 726 yards and 5 touchdowns. He was with the Saints from last year, so he's brand new. But in that season, he only had 1 game over 100 yards. He's still eking over that John Brown number 2 outside receiver role. I think Brown is a little bit better of a receiver at this point in their respective careers. I'm not saying draft Emmanuel Sanders, but I feel like players just need to be aware that he exists out there for times where the ball's not going to Stephon Diggs or Cole Beasley, and who's this random veteran that's still soaking up targets because he's a name that everyone knows.
Yeah, he is a little bit older now, which is kind of concerning, but then I also think this is probably the best spot for him in his career because if he wants targets, if he wants catches, if he wants touchdowns, I don't think there's a better team in the NFL to go to than the Buffalo Bills, who pass more than any other team in the entire league besides maybe the Packers. Like I think that Emmanuel Sanders is not a great receiver to draft, but it's someone that you can draft at the end of your draft and be like, okay, he might actually do something one week, but he's never going to be a starter though.
So what's your verdict on these three guys, Brian?
I think definitely draft Stephon Diggs with confidence, draft Cole Beasley as a bench player with confidence, and take a flyer on Emmanuel Sanders if you don't know who to draft at the end of your draft in a 12-team league. He's probably not going in a lot of 10-team leagues.
No.
He'd probably be more of a free agent, but if you need to pick up a guy for like a week when they're playing an easy matchup, or Cole Beasley's down with an injury or Diggs down with an injury, like Emmanuel Sanders could go in, probably catch 100 yards and a touchdown.
Completely agree with that analysis. So talk about their tight end, Dawson Knox. Dawson Knox was the tight end 33 last year, which means out of a 32 NFL teams, there's a team with two tight ends that was better than him. It's just, I was trying to actually read into this a little bit. So he went 24 receptions on 44 targets, 288 yards, 3 touchdowns. His best game was 4 receptions for 27 yards and a touchdown, which is a very typical tight end stat. So we only had 2 games all year over 8 points, which I feel like is a benchmark. You want your tight end to get you at least 8 points. So he actually led the tight end room. So the tight ends combined for 68 targets last season. So the entire tight end room only combined for 11% of Josh Allen's targets. In 2019, Dawson Knox only had 9% of the targets. So it's one of those things where I think it's not the player himself, it's just the tight end position is not important to Buffalo's offense.
No, they're not at all. And if you watch any of the Buffalo Bills games, it's within the red zone, it's either Stephon Diggs or Josh Allen, and that's it. Maybe Zach Moss now when they add in this new running back core that they're thinking of doing, but Dawson Knox, for whatever reason, is just not fantasy relevant whatsoever. You could start him one week maybe and get lucky with a touchdown, but that's it.
Yeah, he's very tight ends in Buffalo games. The only time you notice who they are is when they're the guy who's wide open in the end zone, because everyone knows Buffalo doesn't use their tight ends.
Some tells me too that Dawson Knox always catches a one game a year where he catches 2 touchdowns, and you're like, oh, maybe he's actually worth picking up. And someone picks him up, and then he gets 2 points, and you're like, okay,
falls right back
to the waiver wire.
All right, now for the next team in the AFC East ranking. Let's talk about the Miami Dolphins, 10-6, made it to the divisional round and lost to the just mentioned Buffalo Bills. Looking at their team, we got quarterback Tua Tagovailoa, running backs Myles Gaskin and Malcolm Brown, wide receivers Devontae Parker, Will Fuller, Jalen Waddle, tight end Mike Gesicki. Last year, they were 22 ranked offense, 20th in defense, 58 to 42 pass first runs. So definitely a team that likes to throw the ball a little bit more. They have the 5th easiest schedule going into 2021. And here's a weird note. They have 2 offensive coordinators this year. So they decided to move on, and that their former running backs coach and their tight ends coach will now dual threat the offense.
That's interesting. I actually didn't know that going into the season. I don't think it's going to help Tua's sake, but I think it's interesting to know that they do have 2 offense coordinators, because they're going to scheme off each other and start to create these crazy plays. The only player I really do like is I like Gaskin and I like Jalen Waddle, and that's really all I like over there.
Okay, so I'm going to set them up and you're going to knock them down, because I feel like you're going to have more fun knocking these guys down.
Just go. Let's hear it.
So, quarterback from Miami Dolphins, Tua Tagovailoa. Finished as the quarterback 32 last year. Only played in 11 games. In that stretch, he had a QBR of 87, threw for 1,800 passing yards with 11 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, added on 109 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. He's basically looked at as a dark horse quarterback for fantasy football players this year. So here are Tua's projections for 2021, Brian. People are saying between 35 to 4,200 yards and 23 to 28 touchdowns. That would put him between quarterback 13 and 21, which means he's still not a QB1 in analysts' eyes, but he's on that fringe QB2 area. Mm-hmm. Former fantasy stalwarts are depending on his performance for 2021. Tell me about Tua.
I mean, we've had so many episodes where we talked about Tua to the point where I can't express how much I do not like Tua as an NFL quarterback, rather alone a fantasy quarterback. I think, yes, he was so good in college and everyone's like, oh, he's the best. He came in, he won a national championship, absolute machine over there, was throwing dimes to his all-star receivers over there. I just, for whatever reason is, I've watched a lot of Miami Dolphins games too because I had, Myles Gaskin on my team. I had Devontae Parker on my team.
You had to pay attention to him.
And it's just so upsetting to start Devontae Parker in your lineup and watch Tua miss him throw after throw after throw after throw after throw. And the only way he gets completions is off checkdowns, little dump offs to Mike Gesicki. And that's really it. I think Tua is good enough to be an NFL quarterback. I just don't think he's going to show a winning team, and he's not going to be able to lead a winning team, which is not going to relate to fantasy relevance either. It's sad to say, he might prove me wrong, but I'm on the board that Tua is not that good.
So my verdict on Tua is that you're not drafting him, but he's going to be in that pool of weekly streaming quarterbacks who you're going to pick up if you just need him for the matchup.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. He could put up like 23 a game, and that could be like your streamer guy, but other than that, I think he's going to be putting up like 14, 15, 16 points. And another reason to why Jason Sanders is such a good kicker in fantasy, because Tua is not good enough to score, but he's good enough to get over the 50-yard line. Leave it at that.
Food for thought. Talking about the running backs. So you can take a break from the hate, because I know you do like this guy. Myles Gaskins and his new handcuff, Malcolm Brown, who came over from the Los Angeles Rams. So Myles Gaskins finished last year as running back 27, had 584 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns, added on 41 receptions for 388 yards and 2 touchdowns. His new handcuff, Malcolm Brown, finished as the running back 45, basically trying to be the starter, but then eventually got pushed out by Darrell Williams and Cam Akers. Last year on the Rams, he had 420 yards, 5 touchdowns, 23 receptions for 162 yards. So the running backs took about 14% of the passing work in the Dolphins system. And an interesting stat I found earlier was that the Dolphins running backs are in the bottom 5 when it comes to rushing, but they're in the top 5 when it comes to receiving, which is just interesting to think about.
That is interesting.
So how do you feel about Myles Gaskins going into this season?
I love Myles Gaskin. I think he's actually like a really good running back. He's small, but he somehow finds like 8 to 10 yards per carry every time, and he's a great receiving back too. He was also, I think, one of the top 5 running backs in red zone carries last season for how small he is. It's kind of crazy to think about. It does concern me that Malcolm Brown's coming in because he's more of a bigger running back. He's more of that handcuff guy, might vulture a lot of more touchdowns. So
that's what I'm worried. I'm worried that like Myles Gaskins is going to get them all the way down to the red zone. And then you're going to see Malcolm Brown stumbling in, and it's just fantasy managers will just be frustrated watching.
See, that's my only concern with Myles Gaskin, but I have heard too, just like from fantasy experts, that Myles Gaskin could be that dark horse guy to come out and be like your absolute true stud RB1, which I can see because he is really good in the pass game. He's like an Austin Eckler. Like he'll probably catch like 7 balls a game. He'll also run for like 60 yards a game too, but he was very, very big with touchdowns last year. I just don't know with the addition of Malcolm Brown, it's going to take away his touchdown numbers this year. And also, Tua's got to throw him the ball. So if Tua can get the ball in his hands, then yeah, he's going to be a good running back. But if he can't get the ball in his hands, then you're stuck with Myles Gaskin as your RB2.
So my verdict is, where he's going in drafts, I'm going to draft Myles Gaskins if he's available. Brown is a handcuff that I don't think is worth drafting, but you're just going to have to be aware of him if anything does happen to Gaskins.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely worth taking Malcolm Brown as like one of your last picks, just in case Gaskins does go down, or they just decide to whatever reason just use Malcolm Brown instead of Myles Gaskin. But I like Gaskin. I mean, I would draft him not confidently, but like feel good enough to draft him because of what he did last year.
So I'm going to talk about the receivers. You did mention you had Devontae Parker last year. You weren't thrilled with having Tua as his quarterback. We do have someone new in town, Will Fuller. He's the wide receiver 5 through the first 11 games last year till he got caught using PEDs. He had 53 receptions for 879 yards, 8 touchdowns. Then you also have Devontae Parker, who's finished as the wide receiver 46 last year. He had 14% of Tua's targets. He was able to make 63 receptions, 800 yards, 4 touchdowns. And now you also have Jalen Waddle coming to the mix, the rookie sensation from Alabama. Right now he's projected for about 860 to 1,060 yards and 5 to 6 touchdowns. How are you feeling about these 3 guys with Tua at quarterback?
It's crazy to think that this wide receiver room is so stacked, and it probably is one of the most stacked receiving cores out there, just from 3 of them. I know there's a lot of good dynamic duo receivers, but 3 good receivers is really tough to come by. And if they don't all have at least decent seasons, that just shows how bad Tua actually is. So Tua has everything in his hand to be able to make them good receivers. I just think Devontae Parker, when he had like Ryan Fitzpatrick, like he was a great receiver. Like he was a stud in fantasy. Like everyone loved him for like that year or year and a half.
He finished as wide receiver 7 or 9 that year.
Yeah, so he was a stud. He was a touchdown machine. People drafted him last year with confidence, and they realized Tua wasn't that guy. Couldn't give him the ball. But coming in with Will Fuller and Jalen Waddle, I mean, Jalen Waddle has a connection from Alabama with Tua already, which is nice to see. And they're both speedsters. And that's kind of how Tua played at Alabama. He just would lob the ball up to his speedsters, and they would just break out for like 80-yard touchdowns. So Tua, again, could prove me wrong. I do like Jalen Waddle the most out of all of them just because of how dynamic he is, how good he actually is, because like he's an absolute freak of a wide receiver. But it just scares me to see, can Tua actually get them the ball, and what's the target share actually going to look like?
I think like verdicts on these guys is where Will Fuller is in drafts, you're calling your shot that you believe in Tua that will give Will Fuller production. Where Waddle is, he's really at the very far back of drafts. At that point, you're just taking the long shot that Waddle could break out. And no one's drafting Devontae Parker right now because we saw what he did with Tua last year, and no one's really excited about that.
Yeah, I think probably from my standpoint, if I had to pick someone, it'd probably be Will Fuller just for the relief that he is that good. You know, he was nasty last year with Sean Watson. He's a speedster. We know what he can do. And then Jalen Waddle is kind of like that breakout guy, like you said, like just trusted, like take him at the back end of a draft, like could be really good, or it could be like a Henry Ruggs dud in his rookie season. You don't know.
So now to talk about the bright spot to last year was the tight end Mike Gesicki. He finished as the tight end 6, took up 15% of the target share, had 53 receptions for 703 yards, 6 touchdowns, kicked me out of playoffs in one game. His best game with Tua was the game he kicked me out, was when he went 5 for 6 for 65 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had 6 games over 8 points. His highest yardage game was 88 yards, averaged about 6 targets per game with Tua versus 5.6 targets per game with Fitzpatrick. So if you really wanted to like really pinpoint that stat, Mike Gesicki played better with Tua than Fitzpatrick.
No, I like Mike Gesicki. Like, I'm not going to downgrade Mike Gesicki because I think Tua can only throw the ball so far that he just dumps it off to Mike Gesicki, which makes him pretty fantasy relevant for a tight end. He is a touchdown machine. I'll give him that. When they're in the red zone, it's like the person they look to the most is Mike Gesicki, and that's kind of what you look for when you're drafting a tight end. And he proved it last year too. I mean, he kicked you out of a fantasy playoff game,
which is pretty hard.
Which is pretty heartbreaking. But yeah, I don't really have anything bad to say about Mike Gesicki. I think that it's really hard to find a lot of good tight ends in this league. And for someone that catches as many touchdowns as he does, and he's a pretty good tight end, I'll give him that. So he might be able to bail out some of the bad throws from Tua and catch a lot more touchdowns this year. But I also think that with this wide receiver core too, that a lot of pressure is going to be put on those guys, and it's going to leave Gesicki wide open for those little 10-yard dump offs where he runs for like 15 yards and, you know, turns into that TJ Hawkinson type of guy.
Yeah. It's kind of fun, like watching him play. He's not fast, but he can make the catch. He's
insane. Made a ton of one-handed catches over the last 2 seasons. He's very athletic. He's a good tight end. I wish he had a little bit better of a quarterback, but you know he'll take what he has.
So my verdict on Gesicki is he's a late round tight end who you're just taking in rounds 10 plus because you don't want to basically waste a pick on a guy who might be the next best tight end. You're picking someone you know is productive. You understand his ceiling. But you know he's not going to leave you like hanging out to dry most of the time.
Of course. He'll be on a roster somewhere, but I don't know if he'll be starting week after week.
Wrapping that up, we're now moving on to... I'm not going to get into giving them a hard time. We're going to talk about the New England Patriots, Bryan.
Nice.
7-9. Missed playoffs for the first time in how long? Has it been 10 years?
Yeah, it's okay. It's been a long time coming. We needed a break from the playoffs just to get the season back up and running.
Just a breath of fresh air to remind yourself.
So many playoff runs that it's like we needed to just take a break, go to Cancun, have some fun, then come back for the season.
So the quarterback is Cam Newton for now. Running backs, Damian Harris and James White. Your receiving core, Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne, Jacoby Myers. Tight ends, Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith. You guys are the 27th ranked offense and 15th ranked defense last year. But that defense also had a handful of COVID opt-outs, which will be coming back for this year. one of the most even split teams when it comes to pass first run is 51-49. So it's basically dead even when you guys decide what you want to do at the line of scrimmage. You have the 12th easiest schedule for 2021. And that's your second year with Cam Newton or eventually first year with Mac Jones.
I mean, I think the Patriots have seriously loaded up on free agents this offseason. I think our defense is going to be 10 times better this year. I think Hightower's coming back. McCourty's coming back. Chung retired, which is sad. Matthew Judon we just got. I mean, we have a boatload of people that are coming out on the defense. And I think our defense is going to really set up our medium to average offense that we do have. And then it really comes down to, is Cam Newton going to be the guys here? He lingered a lot of injuries last year. We know that. Missed some games here and there, which kind of stunk. But now we have Mac Jones coming in competing for that offense as well. I do like Mac Jones now. I didn't like him going into the draft, but as a Patriots fan, he was the most precise passer in all of college football last season, which excites me because now we have Hunter Henry and Jonas Smith as the dual threat tight ends. I mean, a little flashback, we go back to Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez days. We know where we ended up. We were in the Super Bowl that year. So it really comes down to what quarterback do we go through, how run heavy we actually are, and if Cam Newton is good or we end up going with Mac Jones.
All right, so to dissect Cam Newton. Cam Newton's first season with the Patriots, he finished as the quarterback 16 on the year. 2,600 passing yards with only 8 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. Had 600 yards rushing on the ground, 12 touchdowns and a fumble. He was actually the QB7 through the first quarter of the season, which is just so frustrating for Patriots fans to see how the year started off and where the year ended.
He was in MVP talks at that point.
So he had 5 games over 20 points. 2 of those games were over 35 points. But he also had 4 games under 10 points, getting all the way down to 2.8 points for an entire game at his lowest. What people need to remember is that it's been 5 years since his MVP season in 2015. He actually was the number 2 fantasy quarterback when he bounced back in 2017, dropped down to number 12 in 2018, and then he did not play in 2019 because of an injury. So he actually has not had an injury-free season since that MVP year in 2015. The big injury was he tore his rotator cuff in his throwing shoulder towards the end of 2017, which he then injured again the following year, which required surgery. And then he had a Lisfranc fracture in his foot, which ended his 2019 campaign, leading to the Panthers trying to trade him and then cutting him. On the upside, it's his second year being familiar with the system. The free agents, as you guys signed, as you mentioned, were basically to fit Cam Newton's skill set. So what's your verdict on Cam Newton?
I like Cam Newton. I think that his injuries do linger a little bit, and it's kind of showing the downfall of why he can't make wide open passes. I don't think he's the greatest passer anymore as he used to be, but I do think that he is a good runner, and that kind of opens up a lot for the offense from the run game, from the play actions that we run. I mean, we have the 2 dominant tight ends, a receiving core, not as great as I would like it to be, but it's good enough to be able to have for Cam Newton to be good enough and for us to make the playoffs. I mean, people forget that Cam Newton was he was a Heisman winner. He was a national champion. He was a rookie of the year. He was an MVP. And he was a Super Bowl attendee. It's like that is a pretty good resume to begin with. So if he can bring all that Cam Newton magic back, I think he could end up being pretty good this season. But I'm putting it as a to be determined because I'm not sure.
Yeah. Take the magic away. Take the Patriots away. Are you drafting Cam Newton in fantasy?
No. I will not draft Cam Newton in fantasy.
So is Cam Newton a late round quarterback target for someone trying to get that magic back, or is Cam Newton going to be a weekly streamer?
I think he's going to be more like a weekly stream. Someone's going to draft him. Someone's going to keep him on his bench for the entire year just for the hope that first 4 weeks of last season comes back to being the MVP Cam Newton that he was. I think that if he can run the ball a little bit more and he can actually score a lot of rushing touchdowns and can effectively throw the ball too, then Cam Newton's no doubter. He's a top 10 quarterback in fantasy. But I just don't trust it from what we saw last year. And the thought of Mac Jones potentially coming into this offense, it's a little concerning. So I wouldn't trust it, but I would draft him, in a late round streamer for I know my quarterback's not great and I need a guy that could potentially be an MVP or, score a lot of rushing touchdowns. So that's kind of my take on it.
That's how I felt last year. I drafted him as my late round quarterback in the face of all my Patriots fan friends. Just in the start of the season when it was 25 points, 35 points, 20. I was I knew it. But once he hit that stretch where he got COVID, started to get hurt, I bailed on him and picked up Ryan Tannehill, and that worked out for the better. I'm not going to try to take that gamble this year, knowing that even though the Patriots have done a lot to help him, I think what they've done will help him to help the Patriots. I just don't think it really help him enough in fantasy for me to consider him as my quarterback.
I agree with that.
So before we linger on him for too long, talk about the running backs, Damien Harris and James White. So last year, Damien Harris, who we've mentioned before in a previous podcast, running back 44 in the season, missed 6 games due to injury, rushed for about 700 yards, 2 touchdowns, 5 receptions for 52 yards. Primarily the 1 and 2 down back, constantly got vultured by Cam Newton and other options at the goal line. He was now named the starter in camp. I think his upside is a lot higher if Mac Jones eventually takes over, because that means he'll get the goal line work and not Cam Newton. Then you have James White, who finished as a running back 57, 120 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, 49 receptions for 375 yards and 1 touchdown. Primarily your third down back in New England, but Cam Newton doesn't trick down a lot, so I think he also has a higher upside if Mac Jones takes over. How do you feel about your running backs?
I like Damien Harris a lot. I think he proved himself last year, and coming into the season with the weapons that we did add, I think that Damien Harris is set to get 20 carries a game, score a lot of touchdowns. I mean, if you look year after year of Patriots running backs, we always have that stud running back that performs year after year after year. Sony Michel had a great year. LeGarrette Blount had a great year. Let's go all the way back to Corey Dillon, Lawrence Maroney. We had great running backs who put up great fantasy numbers, and it was always tough because we've always had so many running backs in our backfield. But now we got rid of Burkhead this year. Sony Michel is kind of a question mark. And it's really coming down to Damien Harris is going to get the bulk load of the carries. And then James White's going to be that guy that we use in special plays. I don't like James White just because Cam Newton can't pass the ball. But like you said, with Mac Jones, if he were to come in the offense, he could see a little bit more upside. But I mean, again, people were drafting James White year after year, hoping that, Tom Brady would check down. He would catch a lot of screen passes. But James White kind of is fading away, in fantasy relevance now. He's not really being drafted. He's more that guy you pick up on the waiver wire if Damien Harris goes down on injury. And even at that point, it's you can't really trust James White to be a running back. But Damien Harris, I'm good. If there's no running backs on the board and I need an RB2, I'm drafting Damien Harris with confidence because I think he'll score a good amount of touchdowns this season.
Any thoughts about your new rookie, Ramondre Stevenson, at all?
It's so tough to tell with the Patriots. I mean, Bill Belichick could throw him in for 2 plays. He could throw him in for 40 plays. It's so tough to tell. If he proves himself in preseason and training camp and he ends up being that number 2 running back that he flips out with Damien Harris, then sure. But I don't really see it for this first year at least.
So what's your verdict on these 2 guys for fantasy?
Draft Damien Harris with confidence. Don't draft James White.
That's how I also feel. I feel like I'm drafting Damien Harris as a low-end RB2 right now with high-end RB2 upside, maybe RB1. I'm not drafting White, but I would love Damien Harris if Mac Jones takes over.
Definitely.
So talking about your wide receiver room, really not much one to begin with. So right now, from last year, your best receiver is Nelson Aguilar, who finished the year as a wide receiver 21, coming over from the Las Vegas Raiders. 48 receptions, 900 yards, 8 touchdowns. A career year, not bringing 1,000 yards. It's not the best sign for a career year wide receiver who was an original first-round draft pick. He had 3 games over 100 yards, used primarily as a deep threat receiver, had a boom or bust trend, but now he has a quarterback that can't get him the ball downfield, to be honest. Then you go to Jacoby Myers, who was forced into your wide receiver 1 role, finished as the wide receiver 60. 85 receptions for over 1,000 yards, but he's the wide receiver 60 because he didn't catch a single touchdown last year.
That's sad.
He had 2 games over 100 yards.
He threw a touchdown.
He did throw a touchdown, but did not catch any. So It's weird that he's a wide receiver. It feels like the year where the Chiefs had 0 touchdowns to their wide receivers, but the Chiefs were still a good offense that year.
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel great about our wide receivers. Let's just put it that way. I do think Nelson Aguilar is good. I think Nelson Aguilar is good enough. He's not good. It's good enough. And to be that we didn't really have a true wide receiver one last year, if Mac Jones does become the quarterback, I think Nelson Aguilar is that guy to trust in the New England Patriots offense from a wide receiver standpoint. I still think our tight ends are going to be the main focal point of our offense, and Cam Newton running it or whoever, Damian Harris, is going to run the ball. I think it's going to be a lot what you see from the Patriots this year. But from my standpoint, Jacoby Myers he's decent. Kendrick Bourne, decent. Aguilar, decent. It's like not a lot going on there.
But say, who do you think ranked higher last year? Jacoby Myers or Kendrick Bourne?
Jacoby Myers.
By 1.
Yes.
Kendrick Bourne was your wide receiver, 61 last year. Came over from the 49ers. 49 receptions for 667 yards, 2 touchdowns. His best game was 4 receptions for 86 yards and a touchdown. So it's really a shot in the dark chance you got lucky with Kendrick Bourne. So my verdict is I'm drafting none of them, but I'll pick up one of them if there is a quarterback change.
I'm on the same boat. I mean, you can't draft any of them with confidence. I bet you Aguilar is drafted at the end of drafts just because the what if, but It's not a confident pick.
Now to talk about 2 guys we both have a little bit more confidence in, your tight ends. Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith, both brand new to the team. Jonnu Smith finished last year as the tight end 9, coming from the Titans. 41 receptions for 450 yards, 8 touchdowns. His best game was 4 receptions, 84 yards, and 2 touchdowns early in the season. 8 games over 8 points. On the flip side, you've got Hunter Henry coming from the Chargers. 60 receptions, 613 yards, 4 touchdowns. Finished as the tight end 15. His best game was 5 for 65 and a touchdown. Had 7 games over 8 points. How are you feeling about these 2 guys right now?
I like them. I think it's probably the best tight end room in all of the NFL, but neither is a stud, which is tough to say. It's really tough to say which one's going to be better because we really don't know. When Gronk and Hernandez were in the offense, they were so split even that it was so tough to choose, but that was also with Tom Brady. It's like now we're talking about Cam Newton and we're talking about potential Mac Jones. Who is he going to favor? Who's going to be the more dynamic guy in the red zone? Who's going to be the more dynamic guy in the downfield work? It's really tough to tell. I mean, if I had to guess who was going to be better, I'm going to go with Jonnu Smith just because he's younger. He's a little bit faster. He's actually one of the fastest tight ends in the NFL. He also is one of the best tight ends after catch or yards after catch for being a tight end. So I wouldn't trust them drafting them in fantasy, but I would also wait and see which one's kind of going to be better.
So I actually went back and looked at the stats from 2011 when you guys had your unbelievable year with Hernandez and Gronk. So that year, they combined for 28% of the targets from Tom Brady. So I was like, okay, let's see you match that offense. And we just rounded up to 30%. So if you gave them 30% of Cam Newton's production last year, that's roughly only 800 yards and 2.5 touchdowns. So splitting that between the 2 of them, that's 400 yards and 1 touchdown for each guy. Those are terrible seasons for fantasy. Even though Cam Newton could have a much better year this year, isn't going to be significantly enough where they both get enough of a bump? I don't think so.
If you go on the street in the city of Boston and you ask 100 people who was our tight end last year for the New England Patriots, I bet you about 5 of them can actually tell us who the actual starting tight end was. That's how bad our tight end group was last year. I think those stats are correct in a way, but bringing in 2 dynamic tight ends that have shown themselves and improved themselves year after year, I think they will see a little bit of bump. But then again, it's so hard to tell which one's going to be good. Will they split time? What's it going to end up looking like? So from my perspective, probably wouldn't draft them with confidence just because we don't know and there's that huge question mark. But I don't know what you think.
My verdict would be you don't draft either. They're going to get drafted because people are going to be drafting them off how they did last year. But here the reality is, if you draft one, they're going to get caught within 1 or 2 weeks once they're going to be doing terrible. They're going to be weekly streamers depending on the matchup and once we see how they're each using the system like you mentioned. So I'm avoiding both, and I'll pick one up if I take a tight end streamer approach.
Yeah. Again, I'm the same way, but if I had to draft one at the end of a draft, I'd probably go Jonnu Smith over Hunter Henry.
I'd also go Jonnu as well, just because being a little bit shiftier and faster will make a difference.
Mm-hmm. And Jonah was also the first app we got to, so maybe that'll show that we actually did want him, and we got lucky with Hunter Henry at the end. So another food for thought there.
All right, rounding out the bottom of this division, Brian.
Great.
The New York Jets, 2-4 team, missed playoffs. They're looking at a lot of rookies on their team now. We got Zach Wilson, rookie from BYU. Running backs, we got Michael Carter, rookie from UNC. Tevin Coleman. Their wide receiver room is really crowded with, I think, B-rated talent. You've got Corey Davis, Denzel Mims, Jamison Crowder, and Keelan Cole. Right now, their tight end is Chris Herndon. They had the worst rated offense in the 24th ranked defense last year. They have the 13th easiest schedule going into 2021. And they've got a 57-43 pass versus rush play selection. But here's the biggest thing. Adam Gase is gone. The new OC is Mike LaFleur. Previous 3 seasons were in 49ers, who regardless of who their quarterback was, were at top 10 in total offense while LaFleur was there.
I mean, I don't. The Jets are terrible. Let's get that straight. But Adam Gase is no longer there, and any player that played under Adam Gase knows and have spoken out to the media that the players that go to the Jets just go to burn and die, and they're just not fantasy relevant. Now we're talking about a little bit more talent in the Jets offense. We got Mike LaFleur coming in. We got Zach Wilson, who's a stud, an absolute beast. Love Zach Wilson. It's so tough to tell, but my take on the Jets this season is that they're going to have such an atrocious defense, but they're going to have a pretty good offense to back them up. So they're going to lose a lot of games. However, I think game script is going to be enough for some Jets players to be fantasy relevant. And that's kind of intriguing to me. Like, I like Zach Wilson. I like Michael Carter. I like Corey Davis. But it's also really tough to tell because it is the New York Jets.
Right. So I thought this was really funny. When I went to go look at the New York Jets roster today, Zach Wilson was not on the roster yet.
That's odd.
And I assume it's because he maybe has not signed his rookie contract yet. Maybe that might be the little asterisk to it. But when you look up the quarterbacks for the New York Jets right now, Zach Wilson is not on the list. But he was the 2nd overall pick in the 2021 draft. So his college stats his junior year, 247 completions for 3,700 yards and 33 touchdowns. But the big complaint about Zach Wilson is that he didn't play the high-end competition that we're used to getting from the top college prospects. So the big thing is he had plenty of time to make decisions and reads behind a good offensive line in college, which he definitely won't have in New York. They did have said that he will be playing in a similar offense in New York that he did in college. Right now his projections are for about 3,900 passing yards, 15 touchdowns, and 300 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, just as a little wild card effect. They basically kind of have him in that quarterback 15 to 20 range.
I mean, I like Zach Wilson. I think he's good to draft at the end of drafts in the hopes that he's going to be the best rookie quarterback, in the draft. Again, I think game script will help Zach Wilson a lot. And the good thing is, too, he can run the ball, which people, kind of just pass by. So I think he's like that. I mean, he's not Kyler Murray, but he has that same style as Kyler Murray, if that makes any sense. Like, he's a very, very athletic person. He can sling the ball downfield. He's got a huge wide receiver room ahead of him. He can run the ball. So I'd expect to, I'd draft Zach Wilson at the very end of a draft if Trevor Lawrence already went or something like that. But I liked him in college. I thought he was great. I thought he was a great pick for the Jets. It's just going to happen to see if the Jets can use him in the right offense, and if not, then it's going to be the New York Jets, the 1-16 New York Jets. Yeah.
So my verdict is you're drafting him in the late round if you're a Zach Wilson truther, but I think he should be left in the quarterback stream right now.
Probably, yeah. I would say he's probably going to be left as that free agent guy that you pick up after one first week where he drops like 23, and you're like, okay, maybe he has some potential, but he is on the New York Jets. We need to remember that, so don't draft him with confidence. Draft him with the what can he do?
All right. Now to dive into the running back room. We've got Tevin Coleman, who finished last year as the running back 123. Coming from the 49ers, he missed 8 games due to injury. In the games that he did play, he had 53 rushing yards and 34 receiving yards. He hasn't played a full season since 2018. But in that season, in 2018 was their Super Bowl year where they made that run. Finished with over 1,000 total yards and 9 touchdowns as the running back 19. My big thing on Tevin Coleman Kyle Shanahan brought him to the 49ers from the Falcons when he shifted. And Kyle Shanahan has looked at Tevin Coleman and been like, I don't want you on my team anymore. He has the connection with the new Jets head coach, Robert Saleh, and the offensive coordinator, who both came from the 49ers. So I believe that's why he's currently in New York as a quote-unquote starting running back. But the guy we both talked about before is Michael Carter. He is the UNC third down back, drafted in the 4th round, considered one of the top 5 running backs of that rookie class. He's by far the most talented running back in that running back room. And rookie running backs tend to take over after the bye week, which is week 6. So that's long enough for me to keep Michael Carter on my bench, knowing he might be thrusted into that starting role as a running back. How do you feel about the running back situation, Brian?
Yeah, I'm on the same boat with that. I think Tevin Coleman was only brought in just because Robert Saleh and Mike Flood, they were both 49ers guys. They already know what they can get from Tevin Coleman. And it's really going to come down to, can that offense actually effectively use 2 good running backs? I do think that Michael Carter is going to end up taking over, and we both said it numerous amount of times that he's probably going to be that stud running back in that running back group that they do have. But if I had to take one, I mean, I'm definitely taking Michael Carter, and Tevin Coleman's going to be that guy that you might draft, might not draft, probably will end up in the waiver wire towards the end of the season. But I think Michael Carter is definitely the guy to take.
I think what's funny is Tevin Coleman, even in 12-team leagues where I guess, quote unquote, he is a starter on the team right now, is still being undrafted. Like, that's how little faith fantasy managers have in Tevin Coleman.
Tevin Coleman hasn't really been good. Yeah, he really hasn't had like a great season. Like maybe the Falcons, like that one season when Devonta Freeman went down and he was the guy that came over, but that's like really the only good production we've seen from Tevin Coleman. So that's why people aren't drafting him with confidence. However, if they do name him a starter and he does prove himself a little bit, I mean, you got to at least keep him on your bench for the hope that he's going to continue to be the number 1.
The reason why people remember Tevin Coleman is because he had like 2 or 3 games in his career where he came out and just scored 4 touchdowns, ruined someone's day in fantasy, and then disappeared.
I agree with that.
So as we said, my verdict is you're drafting Carter in the mid-late rounds as a potential breakout. Coleman's just a figure piece until the season starts.
Agreed.
So now to get into this mess of a wide receiver room, we got Corey Davis, Jameson Crowder, Keelan Cole, and Denzel Mims. So Corey Davis is slotted to be the wide receiver 1. Last year finished as the wide receiver 31 in total from the Titans, 65 receptions, 984 yards, 5 touchdowns. The important part is he had 5 games over 100 yards. His best game was 11 receptions, 182 yards, and 1 touchdown. So he has proven where it's not just a boom or bust guy. He can get a lot of receptions. He can produce a lot of yards and score. Currently dealing with a mild shoulder strain at practice right now, but that's not going to be a concern by the season starts. You move down to Jameson Crowder, finished last year as the wide receiver 39, missed 4 games, had a great start to his season, but over the stretch, he only ended with 59 receptions, 700 yards, 6 touchdowns, 3 games over 100 yards. His best game for fantasy-wise was 7 for 92 and 1. Another addition is Keelan Cole, wide receiver 48, coming from the Jaguars. 55 receptions, 642 yards last year. Only 1 game over 100 yards. His best game was 5 for 47 and a touchdown, just out of pure need for someone to be open. And then right at the bottom, you have a fantasy hopeful for people the last year. Didn't really pan out for him due to injury. Denzel Mims finished as receiver 109, missed 7 games last year. 23 receptions for 357 yards. His best game was only 3 catches for 71 yards. There are a lot of basically hopes for him to become something in the NFL, but now with how crowded this room is with similar talent, I'm not really seeing it. So how do you feel about these 4 guys, Brian, and who's the guy that you kind of have your eye on out of this group?
I mean, again, I think you said it before too. They're all like C-level, B-level players. They're all pretty good. Like just like on average, like they're pretty good. They were okay with Sam Darnold from the guys that were there last year. Like Denzel Mims was supposed to be that breakout guy. He was supposed to be very talented. Did miss a lot of games due to injury, which stinks. Brashard Perriman last year was like not that bad too. I mean, Jameson Crowder has kind of always proven himself as that Jets wide receiver to go to. But now that they paid Corey Davis so much money, it's almost like they're forced to use Corey Davis as their wide receiver 1. I do think Corey Davis is good. I think he was good in the Titans. A.J. Brown took a lot of his targets last year, but Corey Davis was actually pretty fantasy relevant last year to begin with. Now with Zach Wilson coming in, you'll probably expect to see that Jameson Crowder and Corey Davis are the two main guys that you should look for in drafts. I definitely lean heavier on Corey Davis because I think he's going to be the true wide receiver one there. And then maybe, stream Jameson Crowder as that bench guy and just kind of pan out and hope for if he's going to be decent in that offense.
For me, my verdict would be I'm drafting Corey Davis as a wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside, mainly just because it's the Jets. I'm going to wait and see on the rest because the thing is, a rookie quarterback isn't going to keep 4 wide receivers fantasy relevant, let alone, that's way too, they can barely keep 1 or 2 afloat. 4 is just impossible.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's really, I think it will come down to the Jameson Crowder, Corey Davis, who gets more targets. I mean, again, Corey Davis should see more targets and you should trust him more. However, Jameson Crowder has year after year shown himself to be that target, stud in the Jets offense.
And you also now have to throw rookie Elijah Moore into that room too. So that's 5 guys who could easily just become Zach Wilson's favorite target. So it's too crowded. It's like if there was an alpha receiver and then the rest would be level, then I'd pick that up. But they're all just too close to each other in talent.
I agree with that.
Now to move on to our last guy we're talking about today, tight end Chris Herndon. His name has been floating around for the past 2 years as a potential breakout tight end. He finished last year as the tight end 15 with 31 receptions for 287 yards, 3 touchdowns. So you think, we got LaFleur coming over, we have Saleh coming over, maybe there could be a George Kittle role for Chris Herndon in the offense. But the news out of camp has been he's been struggling to pick up the playbook and losing reps with the first teams to Tyler Kroft and Ryan Griffin, which is just not what you want to hear from this guy who could potentially be a fantasy breakout.
I think year after year we've heard Chris Herndon's name, and year after year he's continued to disappoint people who have drafted him. I'm not going to draft him. I hope no one does draft him because I don't think he's going to be fantasy relevant. And like you said, I didn't know that he was struggling to pick up the playbook, and he's losing more reps to Ryan Griffin and Tyler Kroft. I mean, it's just, again, it's so crowded with so many B to C level players in that offense. The tight end room is also crowded now too. Yeah. So it's who's going to come up on top? Chris Herndon's not really going to be fantasy relevant whatsoever.
Out of even if one of those guys come out on top, it's unless they're getting 4 or 5 catches per game consistently, I don't want any of them.
You can find another tight end elsewhere that actually starts, actually gets number 1 share targets. It's don't draft Chris Herndon.
Yeah. Verdict from both of us, do not draft Chris Herndon. So to wrap everything up, basically keep track of news because this is when you get a mixed bag. You get little reports that could mean a lot, like someone not understanding the playbook and losing reps. And then you get big reports that mean nothing, like team likes new rookie quarterback because he's doing his job and he's understanding the playbook. And he wants to come to camp and do better. No duh.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Make sure to mock draft because this one guys will be jumping up and down because of news like that. You want to stay up to date on what happens to Aaron Rodgers and Deshaun Watson because that will affect easily 5 to 10 players depending on the respective teams they are leaving and joining. So just stay up to news. This is when things are going to go over the place. Do you have any last remarks, Brian?
No, I think I'm good.
All right. As always, cheers. We'll fist pound it because we got it over here. Cheers.